Do your part. On November the 8th, we will go to the polls and cast our vote for the next President of the United States of America. Over the last few weeks, I've heard a lot of people say this is one of the most important presidential elections we have ever had in the history of America. I certainly don't disagree with that statement, but in reality, let me just say that every presidential election is very important. There's really no such thing as a not important presidential election. Anytime we are deciding who is going to lead our country, that is the greatest nation in the world, the United States of America, then it's important. Please keep in mind that the policies and the laws that our leaders enact will not just affect America for today, but for decades to come. Nowhere is that seen more than in the appointment of the United States Supreme Court justices. The next president will more than likely appoint 4 Supreme Court justices. Since 1970, the average tenure of a Supreme Court justice is right at 26 years. The decisions that they make while sitting in that capacity will affect us for generations and generations to come. I don't know about you, but as a Christian, I want to see our policies and our laws reflect Judeo-Christian values. But in order for that to happen, we have to elect leaders that will embrace and leaders that will endorse biblical values. That means that we as Christians have to do our part, and we have to get out and vote. You say, does one vote really matter? The answer is absolutely. Every vote matters. There are several examples I could give to you, but let me just mention 2. By one vote, Texas was admitted to the Union. By one vote, the United States House of Representatives elected Thomas Jefferson as president. One vote matters. Do you realize that in the last presidential election in 2012, there were 93 million Americans that didn't vote? Now, I don't know about you, but that bothers me. 93 million Americans that didn't vote. Now, that number constitutes about 40% of all eligible voters. Did you get that? 40% of all eligible voters, for whatever reason, they chose not to vote in the last election. Now, let's get a little bit closer to home. We know from the statistics, the demographic research, that there are around 60 million evangelical Christians in America. Did you get that? 60 million, give or take. You know how stats and demographic studies are. But 60 million evangelical Christians living in our country, and yet only about 30 million vote in any given election. Only half of the evangelical Christians in the United States of America vote in any given election. Let me give you an example of how every person's vote matters. In the 2008 election, let's go back 8 years, the voting margin in the state of Missouri between the 2 presidential candidates was a mere 3,903 votes. In the election at that particular time, there were over 102,000 Christians in the state of Missouri who did not even register to vote. Just a difference of 3,903 votes, and yet 102,000 Christians living in the state of Missouri were not even registered to vote. Let's go to North Carolina. The voting margin between the two candidates in that election of 2008 was 14,177 votes. But guess what? There were over 280,000 Christians in the state of North Carolina who were not even registered to vote. Now here's an interesting statistic. Every presidential election in the past 25 years has been won by less than 10 million votes. Now think about that for a moment, because a few minutes ago I gave you a different stat. Here's my question. What if the 30 million evangelical Christians who could vote would vote on November the 8th? Now think about that. Don't you think that if they voted, it would make a big difference in this upcoming election? As a matter of fact, it could completely change the direction and the future of our country. I firmly believe that Christians can be, and they should be, a very large and a very influential voting contingency in this election. Here's the bottom line. Voters vote on those who will shape the future of our country. Allow that thought to really settle deep down into your heart and into your soul. Voters vote on those who will shape the future of our country. When you vote, you are able to stand up for the values that you feel are important to you, values that you feel are important to your children, values that you feel are important to your grandchildren, values that you feel are important for the future of our country. When you vote, you are doing your part.